So you both work for quite big firms. What would you say are the advantages or disadvantages of doing?
Well, Magic Circle is, I mean, there are only 5 firms who are in that sort of category. The advantage is that you have a lot of very, very high-end work, all right, which is intellectually very often very demanding, and it's cutting-edge type of things. If people have got something new that's going down, or a deal that's never happened, or something like that, or it's a new thing that's happening, whether it's the privatisation of industries which has not happened before and that sort of thing, it tends to go to those kind of firms. So it's intellectually often very interesting and very demanding, and the people that you work with are very able, bright people, and they are also very demanding of you. So you are constantly sort of kept on the ball and working, which is a very stimulating environment in which to work. But it's also a very hard environment in which to work, because there is very little room for slack, and as I said, you get no work-life balance. Okay, you are expected, if they're charging out these huge sums of hours, you are at the beck and call of clients, and if you're up to 2 or 3 in the morning, you're up to 2 or 3 in the morning while you're doing a deal and things are going down. So although intellectually, and I think the environment in which you're working is extremely stimulating, it's has that downside, okay, that you have to be prepared to accept that your life is bought by other people, and that for a lot of people is very difficult, and I think it's worse now than it used to be. So I think burnout is quite a problem. The other side of it, actually, particularly when you're a younger lawyer, is that you have to be prepared to put up with quite a lot of boring work, because the risks of something going wrong are so high that you are not likely to get the high-end work until you have done quite a lot of simply working at the bottom end, being a gopher, doing all that sort of thing. I mean, funny enough, I had someone who was a school teacher whose son had joined the firm, and she said to me once, at what point does it become interesting, Anne? And I said, well, what does he want to work in? He said, well, he's doing corporate and corporate finance. I said, well, definitely not while you're on your training contract. It doesn't become interesting, because nobody is going to give you responsibility for a deal that's worth £12 billion when you're on a training contract. So in the initial stages, yes, you're working with very interesting teams of people, but you can't expect that you will have personally a huge amount of responsibility, and that can be the downside of that kind of work. But of course, when it does come, then it's great. But you do have to be prepared to do the graft, put up with the boring stuff. So until such stage as they feel that you have developed the skills and you can then take on more responsibility. It doesn't mean you're not part of the team, you are, but you are for a while a fairly lowly member of a team. And that for some people is quite difficult. I mean, and also the kind of work can be highly specialised, so it's not very good if you want to have a bit more general experience. It's going to be mergers and acquisitions, finance, big litigation cases, that sort of thing, and you tend to end up being quite a specialist in small areas because of the level of sort of detail and things that's required of you. And for some people that doesn't suit. Some people want a slightly more broader type of workload. You're not likely to get that, I think, once you actually get into that kind of firm. But you will have wonderful facilities. You'll have every single backup you could possibly want. And it's a very exciting environment in which to work, but it's incredibly hard work.
Yeah, I mean, the firm I worked for eventually was a large regional law firm, sort of one of the biggest ones in the country. But I mean, I have worked in other places as well. I've worked for 4 different law firms. I worked for a 4-office sort of high street practice, first of all. And I was really lucky because I had a supervising partner who was willing to let me do tasks, he'd manage these particular tasks within his own litigation. So I think within a month, my first month of being there, he had an application he wanted heard, and it was in the Royal Courts of Justice. So I was up in the Bear Garden in the Royal Courts of Justice at the age of 18, making an application before a master. And because he looked on the basis, well, what's the worst thing that'll happen? I was asking for more time. We won't get it. It's all good experience. I was lucky because I had a good person to work for. However, the smaller firms, I worked for a niche firm with one office, and that was difficult because they didn't really have a management structure or processes or good IT support, and you didn't really know who to ask if you wanted something done, which is a real negative of a smaller firm, although you might get a better experience supervisory wise. Where I ended up, I really liked. I think it was sort of, the large regional law firm. It was properly managed, it was well structured. If you wanted something done, you knew who to ask. It had procedures in place, but it also was small enough that actually you knew a lot of people, although there were people I worked with in the same office I never spoke to ever, because it was still quite large. But I liked that structure and the fact that it was large enough so they could organise training for all of you to go to at the same time. I preferred that to the smaller firm where, there was, I remember one firm having to go to the office manager to ask if I wanted some post-its. And it's just that sort of thing just eats into your time and becomes quite wearing after a while.